Ancient Egypt was thousands of years in the making, a civilization that created the world's first nation-state, invented writing, and built monuments that still stand today. The pyramids, temples, and golden treasures we recognize instantly, yet the true story of these people remains completely misunderstood. Here's what life was really like in the world's greatest civilization. Before the story, if these help you sleep, like or subscribe would be cool. Also drop where you're listening from and the time. I check the comments and it's crazy seeing people from like Australia and Norway on the same video. Alright, tonight it's ancient Egypt. But before we go anywhere, get cozy, like actually cozy. Pillows good? Blanket situation handled? Perfect. Trust me on this one. You open your eyes to darkness, complete, total darkness, not the kind you're used to, with streetlights leaking through your blinds or the soft glow of electronics. This is proper darkness. It's 19,000 years ago, and you're waking up on the hard ground of a shallow cave in what will someday be southern Egypt. Your body aches. Every inch of you feels the unforgiving rock beneath your thin animal hide. The air smells of smoke from last night's fire, your only protection against the predators that roam the savanna grasslands. Your mouth is dry, your stomach tight with hunger. This isn't a bad night's sleep. This is just sleep for the earliest inhabitants of Egypt. You hear movement outside as the hunters prepare for the day. You're one of them, a nomadic hunter who follows the great herds of wild cattle across this surprisingly green landscape. Yeah, green. This isn't the Egypt you picture with endless deserts and pyramids. Not yet. The climate is completely different. Wetter, greener, with seasonal rains that create lakes and support grasslands filled with animals. Wake up, someone whispers, nudging your shoulder. The oryx are moving. We need to follow. The aurochs, massive wild cattle, are the lifeblood of your people. They provide meat, hide, bone for tools. Track them, kill them, or starve. It's that simple. You emerge from the cave into the pre-dawn light. The sky is transitioning from black to deep blue, stars still visible. Unlike your warm bed at home with its reliable roof, here the elements rule your existence. The morning chill bites at your skin, your breath visible in small clouds. Look! Your hunting companion points to tracks in the soft earth. Fresh, from before sunrise. This is what survival looks like, reading the smallest signs in nature that most modern humans have forgotten how to see. You can tell from these tracks not just that oryx passed by, but how many, how fast they were moving, and roughly how long ago. Your small band of about 20 people quickly breaks camp. There's no time for breakfast. Eating happens after a successful hunt, not before. Your stomach will have to wait. Unlike you lying in your comfortable bed right now, these early Egyptians didn't have the luxury of regular meals. We should check the high ground, you suggest, pointing to a rocky outcrop. See which way the herd is moving. Side note, I spent weeks researching these early hunter-gatherers of pre-dynastic Egypt, and the most fascinating thing is how skilled they were at reading landscapes. They knew exactly which plants signaled water nearby, which animal behaviors predicted weather changes. Their survival depended on observation skills we've completely lost. From the high rock, you can see for miles across the savannah, and there they are, a herd of oryx, maybe 40 animals grazing peacefully about a mile away. Their massive curved horns catch the early morning light. If we circle around, your hunting leader says, we can approach from downwind. Now the real work begins. Your group moves with practiced silence, spreading out in a loose formation. This hunt will take hours, stalking the animals slowly, getting close enough to use your weapons effectively. These aren't guns or even bows and arrows yet. You're using spears and throwing sticks, primitive but deadly in skilled hands. I've always wondered how I'd fare if I were suddenly transported back to this time. I'd probably last about half a day before something ate me or I drank bad water. These people were survival machines. The sun climbs higher and the heat intensifies. Sweat runs down your back. Salt stinging the scratches from yesterday's trek through thorny brush. Your throat is parched. Water is carried in animal bladders and it's rationed carefully. Every resource is precious. Your group successfully brings down 2 oryx after a grueling 6-hour hunt. Now comes the butchering, using stone tools to carefully separate meat, organs, hide and bone. Nothing is wasted. The meat will be shared among the entire group. Some will be eaten today, some dried to preserve it. Good throw, an older hunter says, examining your kill. Clean strike. The spirits favoured us today. These early people already had spiritual beliefs, connecting their survival to forces beyond themselves. They saw patterns in stars, in animal migrations, in the seasonal rains. Their worldview was forming, the very beginnings of what would eventually become the complex Egyptian religion. As night falls, your group returns to the cave. The women have gathered roots, berries, and edible plants to supplement the meat. Together, these foods provide just enough nutrition to survive. A fire is built and the meat is cooked. Wait, it gets better. These earliest inhabitants of Egypt left evidence of their existence, not in pyramids or papyrus, but in something even more personal. High up on rocky cliff faces at places like Kurta, about 100 kilometers south of Luxor, they carved images of the animals they hunted. So, imagine this. After the meal, with a full belly for the first time today, an elder takes a stone tool and begins to work on the rock wall of your shelter. By firelight, they carefully chip away, creating the unmistakable outline of an oryx. These aren't just decorations. They're a kind of hunting magic, a way of connecting with the animals and ensuring future success. The more we honour them, the elder explains, the more they give themselves to us. These rock carvings are the earliest art in Egypt, dating back to around 19,000 years ago. Some show hippos, others cattle, a few even depict human figures and boats, though the boats came later as the climate began to change. And speaking of climate change, that's exactly what would transform this green savanna into the Egypt we recognise. Around 10,000 years ago, the Earth's axis tilted slightly, by about half a degree. This tiny shift had profound consequences, gradually changing rainfall patterns across North Africa. The rains come later each year, an old woman observes as your group gathers around the fire, and they bring less water. She's right. Over your lifetime, you've noticed the seasonal lakes shrinking, the grasslands retreating, game animals are becoming harder to find. Your people have to travel farther for food, competing with other bands for dwindling resources. Fun fact that's not actually fun. This climate change wasn't caused by human activity like today's version. It was a natural shift that happened gradually over centuries, but for the people living through it, absolutely devastating. Imagine watching your entire environment slowly die around you with no understanding of why. Over generations, as the climate continued to dry, these nomadic hunters were forced to adapt. They began to follow the retreating moisture, moving closer to the large lakes that formed during the rainy season. One such area is called Nabta Playa, about 100 kilometers southwest of Abu Simbel in southern Egypt. Here's where things get wild. At Nabta Playa, these early people began to settle into communities, still relying on the annual summer rains, but they needed to predict exactly when these rains would return. Their solution? They turned to the night sky. When those stars, a tribal elder points upward to a specific constellation, appear directly overhead, the rains will come soon. What archaeologists discovered at Nabta Playa is mind-blowing. A stone circle about 7,000 years old, the earliest evidence of how Egyptian weather forecasters became astronomers. They aligned its central stones to the circumpolar stars, stars visible in the night sky all year round. When the sun appeared directly overhead, the stones cast no shadow, signalling that the midsummer rains were approaching. Think about this. Thousands of years before Stonehenge, these people were creating astronomical calendars to track the seasons, and this obsession with aligning monuments to celestial bodies, it would define Egyptian architecture for the next 5,000 years. Every tomb, every temple, every pyramid would be aligned to the stars. The connection they made was simple but profound. If the stars and rain were linked, then this world and the next must be connected. The physical and spiritual realms weren't separate but intertwined. As the climate continued to dry, these people focused more on the one reliable source of water, the Nile. Communities began forming along its banks, taking advantage of its annual flood that left behind rich, fertile soil perfect for growing crops. Look at how the black soil spreads after the water recedes. An early farmer tells his child, "This is the gift of the river." This black soil, Kemet, in ancient Egyptian, would give Egypt its name, the Black Land. By around 5000 BCE, these communities were cultivating wheat and barley, raising cattle and goats, producing the food surplus that would allow civilization to develop. With food production came specialization. Not everyone needed to farm or hunt. Some could become artisans, creating pottery, tools, and eventually luxury goods. Others became religious specialists, responsible for rituals that ensured the Nile's annual flood. I was reading this old archaeologist's field journal from a dig in the 1920s, and he described finding some of the earliest Egyptian pottery. The part that stuck with me was how he could see fingerprints pressed into the clay, actual fingerprints from someone who lived 7,000 years ago. Like, you're literally touching the past. These early settled communities developed distinct cultures in different parts of Egypt. In the north, settlements clustered around the delta and the Fayoum. In the south, they centered around the Kena bend of the Nile. These would become the two lands, Upper and Lower Egypt, that developed into two distinct cultures. What they shared was the miracle of the Nile, which transformed desert into paradise. Its annual flood renewed the soil's fertility, making it some of the most productive farmland in the ancient world. Egyptian farmers could grow everything from wheat and barley to figs, melons, and vegetables. Other lands need constant work, says a farmer as he watches the Nile waters recede from his fields. Ours gives to us freely. This isn't an exaggeration. While farmers in Mesopotamia had to constantly maintain complex irrigation systems, Egyptian agriculture was relatively straightforward. Plant after the flood recedes, harvest before the next one comes. The land practically farmed itself. But along with developing agriculture, these early Egyptians were also developing something else, a unique perspective on death. Unlike their nomadic ancestors, who might simply leave their dead behind, settled people needed ways to manage death within their communities. The body returns to the earth, an elder explains, as a community prepares a grave, but the person continues. This is where we first see the beginnings of what would become Egypt's most mysterious practice, mummification. It started naturally. When bodies were buried in the hot desert sand, they would dehydrate rather than decay, preserving the skin, hair, and nails. The Egyptians noticed this preservation and began to see it as significant. One particular burial from around 3400 BCE shows a body curled into a fetal position, suggesting rebirth, surrounded by pottery, jewellery, and other possessions. Everything important in life accompanied the person into death. The message was clear: death wasn't the end, but a transition to another state of existence. Here's where it gets even weirder. For the Egyptians, the preservation of the body was crucial because it housed the soul. A skeleton wasn't enough. The person needed to be recognizable to house their spirit for eternity. Even when dead, we must appear as ourselves, a ritual specialist explains. How else will our soul know where to dwell? Throughout Egypt's long history, this core belief would drive the development of increasingly elaborate mummification techniques. What began as simple burials in the sand would eventually become the complex process we associate with ancient Egypt. Removing organs, drying the body with natron salt, wrapping in linen, and placing in decorated coffins. As settlements grew into towns and early cities, another crucial development was taking place: the emergence of writing. And you know what's funny about the world's earliest writing? It wasn't developed to express poetry or record history. It was created to calculate taxes. In the ancient city of Abydos, archaeologists found small bone and ivory labels dating to around 3250 BCE. Each was engraved with symbols of animals, birds, or plants, and was pierced for attachment to chests or vessels containing oil, linen, or grain. These symbols represented the regions producing these commodities, sent as tax payments to a central authority. Each mark must be clear, instructs an official as scribes prepare the labels. The king must know what comes from each district. These simple symbols gradually evolved into the elegant hieroglyphic script that would record the Egyptian language for the next 3,000 years. So yeah, bureaucracy and taxes literally invented writing. As these communities grew in size and complexity, leadership became increasingly important. Local chiefs competed for resources and territory. The inevitable clash between the distinct cultures of Upper and Lower Egypt is recorded on what many consider to be Egypt's founding document, the Narmer Palette. This ceremonial palette depicts the moment when King Narmer of Upper Egypt defeated his northern enemy, unifying the two lands under one rule. It shows Narmer in the classic smiting pose, raising a mace above a kneeling captive's head. This powerful image would be repeated throughout Egyptian history. Narmer has united the two lands, a herald announces to the gathered crowd. The white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt now rest on one head. Narmer became Egypt's first king around 3100 BCE, establishing the first dynasty and creating what many scholars consider the world's first nation-state. Egypt was now a unified country with a single ruler, a shared culture, and a central government. When the sun sets on this first day of unified Egypt, you find yourself not in a cave or simple hut, but in a mud brick house in one of the growing settlements along the Nile. The river flows outside, its gentle sounds filtering through the reed mat hanging in your doorway. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but also the continued unfolding of what would become one of history's most enduring civilizations. As you lay on your reed mat, listening to the night sounds of ancient Egypt, it's worth taking a moment to appreciate how far these people had come, from nomadic hunters following herds across a vanishing savanna to the creators of a unified state that would build the pyramids and temples we still marvel at today. The story was just beginning. Unlike your comfortable bed with its soft mattress and perfectly stuffed pillows, this early Egyptian sleeping arrangement is basic. A reed mat on a slightly elevated platform, maybe a headrest carved from wood or stone to keep your head off the ground and preserve your hairstyle. But after a long day of farming, fishing or building, even this simple bed feels welcoming enough. Dawn breaks over a different Egypt now. The year is roughly 2700 BCE, more than 4,700 years ago, and the early nation-state has evolved into something far more complex. You're standing on the west bank of the Nile, watching workers stream toward a massive construction project that will change how we think about human achievement forever. A foreman walks past, barking orders. Those limestone blocks need to be at the north face by midday. The king wants progress. This isn't the construction of the Great Pyramid yet. We're still in the early phases of Egypt's Pyramid Age. What you're witnessing is the beginning of the world's first major stone building, the Step Pyramid of King Djoser at Saqqara. Egypt has been unified for about 400 years now, ruled by pharaohs who trace their lineage back to Nama. These kings have been buried in large, flat-topped rectangular tombs called mastabas, basically glorified rectangular boxes covered with mud brick. Nice, but nothing revolutionary. But King Djoser and his brilliant architect Imhotep are about to change everything. Stack another level on top, Imhotep instructs the master builders, pointing to plans drawn on papyrus. Then another and another. The workers look at him like he's lost his mind. You want to build a mastaba on top of another mastaba? Yes, Imhotep says confidently. And then 4 more on top of that. This moment, this seemingly simple idea to stack mastabas of decreasing size on top of each other would create the Step Pyramid, Egypt's first monumental stone structure and the precursor to all true pyramids. I mean, picture this. No one had ever built something this big with stone before. It was like going from building log cabins to suddenly constructing the Empire State Building. The engineering problems they had to solve were insane. Saqqara becomes a hive of activity. Thousands of workers quarry limestone blocks, drag them on wooden sleds and carefully position them. Others mix mortar, shape decorative elements and carve inscriptions. It's not just a tomb being built, it's an entire complex with courtyards, temples and storage rooms. Imhotep's design isn't just big, it's revolutionary. When completed, the Step Pyramid will stand over 60 meters tall, almost 200 feet, with 6 distinct steps or levels. It's the tallest building on Earth at this time. The king's soul must ascend to join the imperishable stars in the north, a priest explains as you watch the construction. This monument creates the stairway for his journey. That's a key point about Egyptian pyramids. They weren't just massive tombs, they were machines for transformation designed to help the king's soul ascend to the heavens. Around noon, you follow workers to a canteen area where they receive their rations. The Egyptian state is feeding these workers well. Archaeological evidence shows they got plenty of bread, beer, fish, and even meat. These weren't slaves building the pyramids. They were skilled labourers, craftsmen, and seasonal farmers working during the Nile's annual flood when they couldn't tend their fields. "How many days have you been working here?" you ask a stonecutter as you share a jar of beer. 3 months this season, he tells you, taking a hunk of bread. "I'll stay until the flood recedes. The pay is good, enough grain to feed my family for the year, plus the honour of building for the king." That's something modern people don't get about ancient Egypt. Building these monuments wasn't just forced labour, it was part of their religious and social duty. The pharaoh maintained cosmic order, called Mawat, and ensured the Nile flooded properly, bringing fertility to the land. In return, the people contributed to his monuments. It was a divine pact that made Egypt function. As you walk through the construction site, you spot someone important, a man giving detailed instructions to the workers, consulting plans, and inspecting the quality of stonework. This is Imhotep himself, the genius behind the step pyramid. Imhotep wasn't born into royalty or wealth. Historians believe he came from a common background but rose through the ranks because of his brilliant mind. He was architect, physician, astronomer, and eventually high priest. Talk about career advancement. The dude went from commoner to practically divine. See how these blocks must fit precisely, he tells a group of stonecutters, running his hand along a seam. The king's eternal house must be perfect. Imhotep was so revered that after his death he achieved something almost unheard of for a non-royal. He was worshipped as a god of medicine and wisdom. The Greeks later identified him with their own god of medicine, Asclepius. Not bad for an architect. Let's fast forward about 75 years. The step pyramid was just the beginning. Now we're at Giza around 25 and 50 BCE, watching the construction of the Great Pyramid of King Khufu, the largest pyramid ever built and the only one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world still standing today. The scale is almost incomprehensible. Workers are setting in place 2.3 million blocks of stone, some weighing as much as 80 tons. The finished pyramid will stand 146 meters, 481 feet tall, with a base covering 13 acres. For context, you could fit St. Peter's Basilica in Rome inside this thing with room to spare. How do they move those massive blocks? You whisper to a supervisor. With great difficulty, he laughs. We cut the stone at the quarry, then drag it on wooden sleds. For the largest blocks, we need hundreds of men pulling together. Recent archaeological evidence suggests they also used clever techniques like wetting the sand in front of the sleds to reduce friction. The ancient Egyptians might not have had advanced technology, but they were masters at applying basic physics principles to solve enormous engineering challenges. Behind the massive wall now known as the Wall of the Crow lies an entire workers' city. About 20,000 people worked on the Great Pyramid, not all at once, but in rotating shifts throughout the year. Most were farmers who worked during the annual Nile flood when their fields were underwater. Others were permanent skilled craftsmen. Let's check out where they lived. You enter a section of barracks, long, narrow buildings with sleeping platforms for the workers. It's cramped by modern standards, with about 20 men sharing a dormitory-style room. The overseers sleep at each end, explains a worker, pointing to slightly raised platforms at both ends of the room. The rest of us sleep in between, head to foot. The workers' diets were surprisingly good. Archaeologists have found evidence they ate beef, sheep, goat, fish, and plenty of bread and beer. The state provided this food as payment, understanding that well-fed workers were productive workers. In the main workers' village at Giza, there's a designated area for food preparation. Massive bakeries churn out bread, breweries produce beer, and butchers process meat. The logistics of feeding thousands of workers daily was a massive operation in itself. 20 loaves per man, a supply master calculates, making marks on a papyrus sheet, plus 2 jars of beer, onions, garlic, and a portion of fish or meat. When the Egyptian state was strong, this system worked remarkably well. The labour was organised by a complex bureaucracy that kept detailed records of workers, supplies, and progress. Speaking of bureaucracy, that's another Egyptian invention we're still dealing with today. They had officials for everything, overseers of granaries, scribes of the royal documents, masters of the king's works. Every aspect of society was catalogued, recorded, and managed. Let's go inside one of the scribal offices near the construction site. A group of men sit cross-legged, writing on papyrus scrolls with reed pens. These are the accountants of ancient Egypt, keeping track of supplies, workers, and costs. 20 limestone blocks from Tura arrived today, dictates an overseer, while a scribe carefully records the information. 45 workers present in the East Quadrant, 3 absent due to illness. Being a scribe was one of the best jobs in ancient Egypt. You avoided hard physical labour, earned a good living, and had social status. Egyptian parents encouraged their sons to train as scribes. There are actual ancient Egyptian school texts where fathers lecture their sons about the benefits of scribal education versus other professions. One famous text has a father telling his son, "Be a scribe, your body will be sleek, your hand will be soft, you are one who sits grandly in your house, your servants answer speedily, beer is poured copiously, all who see you rejoice in good cheer." Translation: be a scribe so you don't have to do real work, can sit around all day and drink lots of beer. While the pyramids were being built for the kings, most Egyptians lived in much simpler dwellings. Let's visit a typical Egyptian home from this period. It's made of mud brick, the perfect building material for Egypt's climate, staying cool during hot days and retaining warmth at night. The house has a central courtyard where much of the food preparation happens, surrounded by rooms for sleeping and storage. The roof is flat and accessible by an internal staircase. In hot weather, people sleep on the roof to catch the cooler night breezes. We do most of our living outside, explains the lady of the house as she grinds grain into flour. We only go inside to sleep or escape the midday sun. Egyptian furniture is minimal by modern standards. Reed mats cover the floors. Simple wooden stools and low tables serve for eating. Beds are wooden frames with woven reed mattresses. For a pillow, Egyptians use a curved wooden or stone headrest, not as uncomfortable as it looks once you get used to it. The house has no bathroom as we'd recognise it. A corner of the courtyard has a designated spot for a ceramic pot used as a toilet, emptied daily into the fields as fertiliser. Bathing happens with water carried from the Nile or a local canal poured over the body while standing in a shallow stone basin. We bathe daily, the woman tells you, noticing your interest. Cleanliness is important to us. This is true. Ancient Egyptians were obsessed with hygiene by ancient standards. They used natron, a natural salt, as soap, brushed their teeth with frayed reed brushes, and even used mint as breath freshener. While the royals and elites might use elaborate makeup, wigs and jewellery, ordinary Egyptians dress simply. Men typically wear a simple linen kilt, while women wear straight linen dresses with straps that cover their breasts. Children often go naked until puberty. Sandals are for the wealthy. Most people go barefoot. In the fields surrounding the village, farmers work with simple tools: wooden ploughs pulled by oxen, hoes, sickles for harvesting. Egyptian agriculture followed a predictable annual cycle governed by the Nile's flood. There are 3 seasons, a farmer explains while checking the irrigation channels in his field. Akhet, the flood, when the Nile rises and covers our fields. Pereh, the growing season, when we plant after the waters recede. And Shemu, the harvest, before the cycle begins again. This natural rhythm gave Egyptian civilization remarkable stability. While other ancient societies struggled with unpredictable rainfall, the Nile's annual flood was reliable enough that Egyptians could build their entire society around it. Throughout the Old Kingdom, roughly 2700–2200 BCE, this system thrived. The king maintained cosmic order, the Nile flooded properly, crops were abundant, and monumental projects continued. Egypt was the superpower of its day, wealthy and secure behind its natural desert barriers. The pyramids of the 4th dynasty mark the pinnacle of this achievement. After Khufu's Great Pyramid, his son Khafra built the 2nd pyramid at Giza, the one with the Sphinx in front, and his grandson Menkaura built the 3rd, smaller pyramid. Together they form the iconic skyline we associate with ancient Egypt. But by the 5th dynasty, something was changing. The pyramids built by later kings were smaller, with less impressive materials. The massive building projects had strained Egypt's resources. Climate change was beginning to affect the reliability of the Nile flood. Political power was becoming more decentralized. Let's visit one final site before the Old Kingdom begins its decline. At Abusir, just south of Giza, King Unas has built his pyramid complex around 2400 BCE. What makes it special isn't its size, but what's inside. The walls of the burial chamber are carved with hundreds of hieroglyphic inscriptions known as the pyramid texts, the oldest religious writings in Egypt. These spells will protect the king in the afterlife, a priest explains, as artisans carefully carve the hieroglyphs. They will help him navigate the dangers, join with Osiris, and rise to the sky with Ra. The pyramid texts give us our first detailed look at ancient Egyptian religious beliefs. They describe a complex afterlife journey where the king must overcome obstacles, pass judgments, and transform into different divine forms. This religious tradition would evolve over thousands of years, but its core elements are already present. While Unas's causeway connecting his pyramid to the Valley Temple shows scenes of bounty and prosperity, it also contains a troubling image, emaciated figures representing famine victims. This rare moment of realism in Egyptian art hints at problems on the horizon. These are the Bedouin from the desert edges, an artist explains, painting the thin figures. They suffer when the rains fail, but such troubles could never reach the Black Land. He's wrong. By 2200 BCE, about 200 years after Unas, Egypt would face a series of low Nile floods, leading to famines, political instability, and the collapse of central authority. The Old Kingdom's end would plunge Egypt into its first dark age, a period of fragmentation called the First Intermediate Period. As the sun sets on the Pyramid Age, you watch workers heading home after a day of construction. They're tired but satisfied, participating in what they believe is the most important work possible, ensuring their king's immortality and, by extension, the stability of their world. They have no idea that the magnificent civilization they're building, with its massive monuments, complex bureaucracy, and elaborate religious traditions, will collapse within a few generations, that the divine order they take for granted is more fragile than they can imagine. Unlike your safe, predictable world with its weather forecasts and grocery stores, these ancient Egyptians live with constant uncertainty. One bad Nile flood means widespread hunger. One weak pharaoh means political instability. The monuments they build are, in part, an attempt to create permanence in an impermanent world. As night falls over the Giza Plateau, the partially completed Great Pyramid looms against the starry sky. Thousands of workers sleep in their barracks, exhausted from a day of hauling stone. In the nearby palace, Pharaoh Khufu reviews plans with his officials. And along the Nile, ordinary Egyptians sleep in their simple homes, trusting that tomorrow will be like today, unaware of the changes that will eventually transform their eternal empire. The Nile isn't flooding properly anymore. For the 5th year in a row, the waters have barely risen, leaving fields parched and granaries dangerously empty. We're now around 2180 BCE, and Egypt's Old Kingdom, the age of massive pyramids and centralized royal power, how can the king fail to bring the floods? a farmer asks, looking at his withered crops. Has he lost the favour of the gods? This is Egypt's first major crisis, what historians call the First Intermediate Period, a perfect storm of disasters, climate change bringing multiple low Nile floods, famine spreading through the countryside, and a weakened monarchy unable to respond effectively. Pharaoh Pepti II, the last significant king of the Old Kingdom, supposedly reigned for 94 years but ended his incredibly long rule as an ineffective old man. Think about this for a second. Imagine if Queen Elizabeth had stayed on the throne until she was 120 years old, increasingly frail and out of touch. The system just can't function properly with that kind of leadership vacuum. The collapse of central authority creates a power vacuum that regional governors, called nomarchs, quickly fill. These local rulers stop sending taxes to the capital, instead keeping resources to take care of their own territories. Egypt effectively splits back into the regional kingdoms it had been before Narmer's unification over 900 years earlier. Let's visit one of these regional power centres. At Moala in Upper Egypt, a nomarch named Anktifi has declared himself the effective ruler of his territory. He's had his tomb carved with an autobiography that tells us exactly what life was like during this chaotic time. I gave bread to the hungry and clothing to the naked, Anktifi's inscription boasts. I never allowed anyone to go hungry in this province. Reading between the lines of Anktifi's tomb text, we see a man taking advantage of the power vacuum. He describes military campaigns against neighbouring provinces, claiming he's bringing order, but really just expanding his territory. He barely mentions the king at all, just one tiny reference to a royal name, almost as an afterthought. I am the beginning and the end of mankind, Anktifi's inscription declares, since nobody like me existed before, nor will he exist. Talk about ego, but his self-promotion reveals something crucial. Local strongmen were now the real power in Egypt. The divine pharaoh was increasingly irrelevant. The real suffering, though, falls on ordinary Egyptians. Anktifi's tomb contains a chilling description. All of Upper Egypt was dying of hunger to such a degree that everyone had come to eating their children. While that's probably exaggerated for dramatic effect, like, look how bad things were until I saved everyone, archaeological evidence does show signs of widespread malnutrition during this period, without the coordinated response of a strong central government. Local areas were left to fend for themselves when the Nile failed to flood properly. Now, around 2050 BCE, we're in Thebes, modern Luxor. This southern city was previously a backwater, but it's becoming the centre of a movement to reunify Egypt. A family of local rulers named Mentuhotep, the war god Montu, is satisfied, are building military power and expanding northward. The South will rise again, jokes a soldier as troops gather for a northern campaign. Thebes will rule all Egypt. He's right. After decades of fighting, Mentuhotep II defeats the northern rulers based at Heracleopolis and reunifies Egypt around 2055 BCE, establishing what we now call the Middle Kingdom. Here's where things get really brutal. When archaeologists excavated Mentuhotep's temple complex at Dir el-Bahri, they found a mass grave containing about 60 soldiers. These weren't carefully mummified nobility. These were the actual guys who fought and died in the civil war to reunify Egypt. Look at this, an archaeologist says, pointing to a skeleton. Arrow penetration to the chest, and this one, massive head trauma, probably from a mace. These soldiers' bodies tell the violent story of reunification. Some had healed fractures from previous battles before being killed in their final fight. Others showed signs of having been finished off while helpless on the battlefield. All were collected and buried with honour in what might be the world's first known war cemetery. But the real horror of Egypt's civil war happened at Abydos, Egypt's most sacred site. This was the burial ground of Egypt's first kings, the ones who followed Nama and established the early dynasties. During the civil war, northern troops did the unthinkable. They desecrated these royal tombs, burning them and destroying the royal mummies inside. The vile deed, as later texts called it, shattered Egypt's physical connection to its royal ancestors. The sacred bodies of the kings, meant to be preserved for eternity, were destroyed. It was an act of cultural desecration almost impossible for modern people to fully grasp. Imagine if someone burned down Arlington National Cemetery while simultaneously destroying the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. Mentuhotep Seng's reunification of Egypt was thus not just a political victory, but a spiritual restoration. He portrayed himself as the heir to the Old Kingdom, building a temple complex that combined pyramid and temple elements. He wore both the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt, symbolizing the reunification of the two lands. "I have healed the division," Mentuhotep declares in an inscription. "The two lands are united under my rule as they were under the kings of old." The Middle Kingdom that follows, roughly 2050–1650 BCE, is considered by many scholars to be Egypt's golden age, not of massive monuments like the Old Kingdom, but of art, literature, and a more humanistic culture. The trauma of the First Intermediate Period had changed Egyptian society profoundly. Let's visit the new capital at Itj Tawi, near the entrance to the Fayum region. The Middle Kingdom pharaohs have moved the administrative centre from Memphis to this new location, symbolising a fresh start. In the scribal schools attached to the royal court, something remarkable is happening. A new form of literature is emerging. Stories, teachings, and even what we might call novels. The best known is the tale of Sinuhe, about an Egyptian official who flees to Asia after the assassination of a king, lives among foreigners, and eventually returns home to Egypt. "Read it to me again," a young scribe asks his teacher, the part where Sinuhe fights the champion of Retinue. The teacher unrolls a papyrus scroll and reads dramatically. "Then he came at me while I waited. I shot him, my arrow sticking in his neck. He screamed, he fell on his nose. I slew him with his own battle axe." This is entertainment, not just religious or royal propaganda. The Egyptians are developing a rich literary tradition that includes adventure stories, wisdom texts, and even love poetry. Unlike the formal, idealized art and writing of the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom literature often deals with uncertainty, moral ambiguity, and real human emotions. Another important text from this period is the dialogue of a man with his bar, essentially, a man arguing with his soul about whether life is worth living, possibly the world's first recorded exploration of existential despair. The Egyptian who wrote it, whoever he was, would have understood Hamlet's "to be or not to be" perfectly well. "Why do I remain alive?" the man asks his soul. "Death is before me today, like the recovery of a sick man, like going outside after being confined." His soul responds, "If you think about burial, it's heartbreak. It's bringing tears by making a man miserable. Don't think about it." So basically, a guy is contemplating suicide, and his soul is like, "Dude, chill, death sucks too." This psychological depth reflects a culture coming to terms with the trauma of civil war and social collapse. The old certainties were gone. The king wasn't an untouchable god anymore, and the promise of eternal order had been broken. The Middle Kingdom response was to create a more accessible version of Egyptian culture. Royal portraiture becomes more humanistic. Kings are shown with worry lines and expressions that suggest the burden of rule. Regular people can now access afterlife magic previously reserved for royalty. Coffins for non-royals are inscribed with protective spells adapted from the royal pyramid texts. Even a craftsman like me can have an afterlife now, says a carpenter as he saves to buy his own inscribed coffin. The gods will know my name. This democratization of the afterlife is one of the most important developments in Egyptian religious history. By the Middle Kingdom, even middle-class Egyptians could purchase funeral equipment with protective spells and images, essentially giving them access to the same afterlife previously reserved for kings. The economic foundation for this cultural flowering comes from massive infrastructure projects started by the Middle Kingdom pharaohs. Let's visit one of them, a huge irrigation project in the Fayum region, where channels and dikes are being constructed to control the Nile's flow into this natural depression. When complete, this system will irrigate thousands of acres, explains an overseer as workers dig channels. Even in years of low flood, we'll have water stored here. Senusret III, one of the most powerful kings of the 12th dynasty, exemplifies the new Middle Kingdom ruler. His statues show him with a careworn, almost scowling expression, a far cry from the serene, idealized faces of Old Kingdom kings. The message is clear: ruling is hard work, not divine play. The king sleeps little, thinking of his people, a court official explains. His ears hear the needs of Upper and Lower Egypt. Senusret III was also a military badass who led campaigns into Nubia, modern Sudan, to secure Egypt's southern frontier and control the gold mines there. Instead of relying on the traditional Egyptian approach of periodic raids, he established a permanent military presence by building a series of massive fortresses along the Nile. These Middle Kingdom fortresses were engineering marvels, massive mud brick structures with walls up to 11 metres, 36 feet high, and moats that would make medieval castle builders jealous. The largest, Buhan, had an outer wall over a mile in circumference. They functioned as military bases, administrative centres, and trading posts rolled into one. These walls say to the Nubians, Egypt is here to stay, a garrison commander tells you as you walk the battlements. No one passes north or south without our permission. Control of these fortresses meant control of trade. Gold, ivory, ebony, and exotic animal skins flowed north from Inner Africa, while manufactured Egyptian goods went south. The fortresses also processed copper and other minerals mined in the surrounding deserts. But Egypt's influence wasn't limited to the south. During the Middle Kingdom, Egypt established trading connections across the Mediterranean world and into the Near East. At the port of Byblos in modern Lebanon, Egyptian merchants had a permanent presence trading for the cedar wood that Egyptians prized for shipbuilding and luxury items. Lebanon's mountains grow the finest cedars, an Egyptian trader tells you as a ship unloads at an Egyptian harbour. One tree can make a mast tall enough to carry a sail that moves a ship with 60 men and tons of cargo. Egyptian ships were technological marvels capable of navigating both the Nile and the Mediterranean. One of the most famous Middle Kingdom achievements was a trading expedition to the mysterious land of Punt, probably somewhere along the Red Sea coast of Africa, recorded in detailed relief carvings showing exotic goods being brought back to Egypt. From Punt we brought frankincense trees, ebony, gold, ivory and exotic animals, boasts an expedition leader, even baboons and a giraffe for the king's menagerie. The Middle Kingdom also saw significant developments in everyday technology. Water clocks, improved pottery wheels, bronze working, and advancements in mathematics and medicine all occurred during this period. Egyptian doctors were famous throughout the ancient world, with specialized knowledge of anatomy, pharmaceuticals, and surgery. I found this old medical papyrus transcript where an Egyptian doctor describes treating a head wound. He examines it and says, "If you examine a man with a gash on his head that penetrates to the bone, you should palpate his wound. If you find that there is a swelling protruding on the outside of that gash, you should say about him, 'An ailment I will treat.'" But if the skull is actually split open, revealing the brain, the diagnosis changes, an ailment not to be treated, which is honestly fair enough for Bronze Age medicine. Despite these achievements, the Middle Kingdom contained the seeds of its own decline. Senusret III and his successor Amenemhat III had centralized power by reducing the authority of the nomarchs, those regional governors, but this meant the system depended increasingly on a strong king. When Amenemhat IV died after a brief reign, he was succeeded by a female pharaoh, his sister Sobekneferu. While she was a legitimate ruler, her brief reign, about 4 years, ended without a clear successor, concluding the 12th dynasty. The 13th dynasty that followed maintained the appearance of the Middle Kingdom, but with significantly less stability. In less than a century, more than 60 kings ruled in rapid succession, few lasting more than a year or two. Central control weakened, and Egypt began to fragment again. During this unstable period, new groups were moving into the Nile Delta from the Near East. Known to the Egyptians as Amu, or Asiatics, they gradually established themselves as rulers in the eastern delta city of Avaris. By around 1650 BCE, these foreign rulers, whom historians call the Hyksos, had gained control of northern Egypt, while a native Egyptian dynasty continued to rule the south from Thebes. Egypt was divided once more, entering the Second Intermediate Period, but this division was different from the first. Now, foreigners controlled a significant portion of Egypt, challenging not just political unity, but cultural identity. They worship strange gods, complains a Theban priest. They use curved swords instead of proper Egyptian weapons. They speak our language with strange accents. How can such people claim to be kings of Egypt? Yet the reality was more complex. Archaeological evidence shows the Hyksos quickly adopted Egyptian culture, writing, and royal titles. They worshipped Egyptian gods alongside their own deities. Rather than being simply foreign invaders, they represented the complex cultural mixing that comes with migration and integration. As the sun sets on the Middle Kingdom, Egypt stands at a crossroads. The confident, isolated civilization of the Old Kingdom is gone forever. The more cosmopolitan, internationally connected Middle Kingdom is fading. Ahead lies a period of foreign influence, followed by a new kind of Egyptian empire, one that will project its power far beyond the Nile Valley. In your modern bed, with its machine-made sheets and memory foam pillow, you can sleep secure knowing food will be available tomorrow regardless of weather or politics. But as you drift off in ancient Egypt at the end of the Middle Kingdom, such certainties are fading. The Nile may or may not flood properly. The gods may or may not be pleased. And foreigners with strange weapons and customs are moving into the land of the pharaohs, bringing both threat and opportunity to the world's most ancient civilization. Morning breaks over a divided Egypt. In the north, foreign rulers called the Hyksos control the delta from their capital at Avaris. In the south, Egyptian kings still rule from Thebes. We're in the Second Intermediate Period, around 1600 BCE, and tensions between these two kingdoms are reaching a breaking point. The Hyksos aren't what you might expect. Rather than wild barbarians, they're sophisticated rulers who've largely adopted Egyptian culture. They write in hieroglyphs, worship Egyptian gods alongside their own deities, and use Egyptian titles. Their kings have taken Egyptian throne names. The current ruler calls himself King Apophis. They want to be Egyptian, a Theban official scoffs. They wear our clothes, use our writing, but they'll never truly understand Ma'at. Ma'at, that concept of cosmic order, balance and justice that underpins Egyptian civilization. To the Thebans, only a true Egyptian king can maintain it. What makes the Hyksos truly threatening isn't just their control of northern Egypt, but their military innovations. They've introduced new weapons and tactics that give them an edge. The composite bow, more effective axes, and most importantly, the horse and chariot. Let's visit a Hyksos military camp outside Avaris. Soldiers are training with these strange new weapons, particularly the chariot, a light, fast, two-wheeled vehicle pulled by horses. Egypt had never seen anything like it before. The chariot is a mobile fighting platform, a Hyksos officer explains to new recruits. One man drives while the other shoots. We can strike and move before Egyptian infantry can even reach us. This military technology was revolutionary. Previously, Egyptian battles were mainly infantry affairs, masses of men with shields, spears and maces slugging it out. The chariot changed everything, allowing archers to rapidly deploy, shoot and relocate. It was the ancient equivalent of introducing tanks to a battlefield of foot soldiers. The standoff between Thebes and the Hyksos deteriorated when King Apophis sent a message to the Theban ruler Sekenenre-Ptah. The exact contents are lost to history, but it apparently contained an insult so severe that it provoked a military response. The message complained about hippos in a Theban pool making noise and keeping Apophis awake in his capital hundreds of miles away, a court official whispers. It was a deliberate provocation. Whatever the message contained, the conflict escalated. Sekenenre-Ptah led forces north against the Hyksos but died in the fighting. His mummy, discovered by archaeologists in the 1880s, shows the horrifying injuries that killed him. Massive wounds to the head from what were likely Hyksos-style axes. 5 separate blows. A royal physician says quietly, examining the king's body as it's prepared for mummification. He faced his enemies directly, too directly. The struggle continued under Sekenenre's son Kamose, who pushed further north, and then under his brother Amose, who finally succeeded around 1550 BCE. Amose besieged Avaris, captured it, and pursued the fleeing Hyksos all the way to their fortress at Sharuhen in southern Canaan, which he besieged for 3 years before capturing it. The victory over the Hyksos marks the beginning of Egypt's new kingdom, 1550-1069 BCE, arguably the peak of ancient Egyptian civilization, but something fundamental had changed. The experience of foreign occupation and the struggle to expel the invaders transformed Egypt from an insular kingdom into an aggressive empire. Never again will foreigners rule the Black Land, Ahmose declares to his troops. From now on, we will strike them in their own territories before they can threaten Egypt. This new imperial mindset, combined with the military technologies adopted from the Hyksos, particularly the chariot, turned Egypt into the ancient world's superpower. Under the kings of the 18th dynasty, Egyptian armies would march far beyond their traditional borders, creating an empire that stretched from Sudan to Syria. Let's jump ahead a few decades to the reign of Thutmose III, around 1450 BCE. He's led the Egyptian army north into Canaan, where he faces a coalition of local princes backed by the powerful kingdom of Mitanni at the Battle of Megiddo, probably the first major battle in history that we can reconstruct in detail. The enemy has taken position at Megiddo, reports a scout to Thutmose. They believe we must take the wide, safe road around the mountain, but there is a narrow path that leads directly to them. They won't expect us there. Thutmose makes a daring decision, leading his army through a narrow, dangerous mountain pass that his generals advise against. The gamble pays off. He catches the coalition forces by surprise and scatters them, forcing them to retreat into the walled city of Megiddo, which he then besieges for 7 months. If we had followed the easy path as the enemy expected, the battle would have been much harder, Thutmose tells his officers afterward. Sometimes the most dangerous route offers the greatest opportunity. Thutmose III would ultimately lead at least 17 military campaigns into the Near East, creating Egypt's first true empire. He was so successful that he's sometimes called the Napoleon of ancient Egypt. Under his rule, wealth poured into Egypt: gold, silver, precious woods, horses, and exotic goods from across the known world. But before Thutmose III's solo rule, there was one of the most remarkable chapters in Egyptian history, the reign of Hatshepsut, his stepmother and aunt, who ruled as a female pharaoh for about 22 years. Officially, Hatshepsut began as regent for young Thutmose III, who was only about 2 years old when his father died, but within a few years she had taken the unprecedented step of declaring herself king, not queen, but king with all the titles and regalia of a male pharaoh. Let's visit her magnificent mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, where massive relief sculptures show Hatshepsut performing all the traditional duties of kingship. In these images, she's often depicted with a male body wearing the traditional false beard of the pharaohs, though other images show her in female form. The king must be shown performing the sacred rituals, explains a priest at the temple. Hatshepsut does everything a king must do to maintain Ma'at. One of Hatshepsut's greatest achievements was a trading expedition to the land of Punt, recorded in detail on her temple walls. The carvings show Egyptian ships sailing to this exotic location, probably somewhere in East Africa, where they traded for frankincense trees, ebony, gold, ivory, and exotic animals. The Punt expedition shows our strength extends beyond military conquest, says a court official proudly. Nations willingly trade with Egypt because of our wealth and prestige. After Hatshepsut's death, Thutmose III finally ruled alone, though he eventually had most references to Hatshepsut erased from monuments, probably to strengthen his son's claim to the throne rather than out of personal animosity. He built on her diplomatic and economic foundations while adding his own military conquests. By the height of the New Kingdom, around 1400 to 1300 BCE, Egypt had become unimaginably wealthy. Let's visit Thebes, now the religious capital, during a festival. The city is booming, temples are expanding, trade goods from across the known world fill the markets, and construction projects are everywhere. The Temple of Karnak, dedicated to the god Amun, has become the largest religious complex in the world. Walking through its massive pillared halls, you're dwarfed by columns 24 meters, 80 feet high. This isn't just a temple, it's a statement of Egypt's power and prosperity. The temple owns lands throughout Egypt, a priest tells you proudly. Hundreds of villages, thousands of cattle, countless fields. Our granaries are always full. The cult of Amun has become incredibly powerful. Originally a minor local deity associated with Thebes, Amun rose to become the state god of Egypt. Identified with the sun god Ra as Amun-Ra, his priesthood controls vast wealth and wields significant political influence. Let's move from the temple to the palace of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, who rules around 1350 BCE at the absolute peak of Egypt's prosperity and international prestige. His palace at Malkata on Thebes' west bank is a sprawling complex with audience halls, residential quarters, artificial lakes and gardens. Diplomatic envoys from Babylon, Mitanni, Assyria and Hatti all wait to see the king, explains a royal steward as you walk through bustling palace courtyards. They bring tribute and requests for Egyptian gold. Egypt under Amenhotep III is so wealthy that he can literally give gold away to foreign rulers. In diplomatic letters found by archaeologists, the famous Amarna letters, foreign kings repeatedly beg Amenhotep for more gold, complaining that what he sent previously wasn't enough. A testament to Egypt's incredible resources. Gold in Egypt is more plentiful than dust, Amenhotep reportedly told one ambassador. This wasn't just royal propaganda. Egypt controlled the major gold-producing regions of Nubia and the Eastern Desert. A single mine could produce over a ton of gold per year, an astronomical amount in the ancient world. But regular Egyptians were prospering too. Let's visit the village of Deir el-Medina, home to the skilled workers who cut and decorated the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. Unlike the anonymous masses who built the pyramids, we know these people by name and their personal lives, thanks to thousands of written records they left behind. 8 bread loaves, 4 jars of beer, and half a sack of dates, recites a workman to his wife as he returns home, listing his pay for the day, plus this piece of linen the foreman gave me for fixing his door. Workers like him were well-compensated specialists, the elite craftsmen of their day. They received official rations, but also earned extra income through side work. Their homes were small but comfortable, with multiple rooms, some basic furniture, and even artwork on the walls. What's most remarkable about Deir el-Medina is how much it tells us about ordinary life in New Kingdom Egypt. The workers left behind everything from official records to personal letters, medical prescriptions, love poems, and even gossip. One ostracon, a pottery shard used as a writing surface, records a worker complaining that his neighbour's donkey ate his vegetables. Another contains a love poem from a young man to his girlfriend. "Your love has gone clear through my body like honey mixed with water," reads the poem. "My heart races when I think of you." Daily life for these workers followed a predictable pattern. They worked 8 days, then took 2 days off, the earliest known weekend. They received regular deliveries of food, water, and supplies from the state. When not working in the royal tombs, they created their own tombs, built furniture, and performed various specialised crafts. Not all was harmony, though. Records from Deir el-Medina document the first recorded labour strike in history. When grain deliveries were late, the workers simply sat down at the entrance to the Valley of the Kings. "We are hungry," their leader announced to officials. "We have no grain, no oil, no fish, no vegetables. Tell this to Pharaoh. We cannot cut his tomb if we starve." The officials scrambled to address the problem, eventually providing the missing rations. This wasn't a modern-style labour movement, but it shows that even in ancient autocracies, workers could assert themselves when pushed too far. The tombs these workers created in the Valley of the Kings were masterpieces of art and engineering. Unlike the pyramids, which advertised the king's burial place to everyone, these tombs were cut deep into the limestone cliffs, hidden from view and potential robbers. Their walls were covered with religious texts and images to help the king navigate the afterlife. Each scene must be perfect, a master artist instructs his apprentice as they paint a tomb wall. The king's eternal life depends on it. The new kingdom saw changes in burial practices for royalty. While kings were still mummified with elaborate rituals, their bodies were now placed in a series of nested coffins, often made of solid gold or gold-covered wood, rather than in massive stone sarcophagi. The famous golden mask of Tutankhamun gives us an idea of the splendour of royal burial equipment during this period. Speaking of Tutankhamun, his relatively minor reign comes after one of the most dramatic episodes in Egyptian history, the religious revolution of Akhenaten, but that's a story for another time. For ordinary Egyptians in the New Kingdom, life was generally better than it had been in earlier periods. The empire brought wealth that trickled down through society. Diets improved with greater variety of foods, including imports. Cosmetics, jewellery and luxury goods became more widely available. Even common homes often had decorative elements and some basic furniture. Medical care also advanced. The Edwin Smith surgical papyrus from this period shows Egyptian physicians had sophisticated knowledge of anatomy and trauma treatment. They could set broken bones, stitch wounds, and even perform simple surgeries. They had an extensive pharmacopoeia of plant-based medicines, though these were often mixed with magical incantations. For a wound, apply fresh meat on the first day, a physician instructs his student. Then dress it with oil, honey, and plant fibres. Recite the healing spell twice daily. Education expanded during the New Kingdom, with more people learning to read and write than in previous eras. While still limited mostly to boys from privileged families, literacy was no longer just for specialised scribes. Military officers, priests, administrators, and merchants often had basic literacy. Clothing and fashion evolved too. While the basic garments remained simple linen kilts for men and sheath dresses for women, styles became more elaborate for the wealthy. Pleated, draped, and layered garments appear in artwork. Wigs grew more elaborate and jewellery more intricate. The latest style from the capital, a wig maker tells a wealthy client, showing her an elaborate creation. All the court ladies wear them this way now. This increasing sophistication reflected Egypt's growing international connections. The New Kingdom was far more cosmopolitan than earlier periods. Foreign diplomats, merchants and captives brought new ideas, technologies and customs. Egyptian art shows influences from Minoan Crete, Mesopotamia and the Levant. The royal court became increasingly international. Egyptian kings maintained diplomatic marriages with foreign princesses, who brought their own entourages and customs. Foreign mercenaries served in the Egyptian military, eventually settling and integrating into society. As the sun sets on Amenhotep III's Egypt, the empire is at its absolute peak, wealthy, powerful, prestigious. No one could imagine that within a generation his son Akhenaten would upend Egyptian religion in a radical experiment that would threaten centuries of tradition. Or that within a century, Egypt would face a new threat from the sea that would begin its long, slow decline. Lying in your comfortable modern bed, you have the luxury of historical perspective. You know that even the mightiest civilizations eventually fade, but for an Egyptian living in the glory days of Amenhotep III, the divine order established at creation seemed as permanent as the stars. Egypt had overcome division, expelled foreign rulers, and created an empire. The temples were wealthy, the army was strong, and the gods were pleased. What could possibly go wrong? The royal palace at Thebes is in chaos. Amenhotep IV, son of the great Amenhotep III, has just made an announcement that's left the court stunned. He's changing his name to Akhenaten, effective for Aten, abandoning the traditional gods and moving the capital from Thebes to a new city he'll build in the middle of nowhere. Has the king lost his mind? Whispers a priest of Amun, looking around nervously to see if anyone overheard. We're witnessing one of history's first recorded religious revolutions. Around 1350 BCE, Akhenaten upended over 1,500 years of Egyptian religious tradition by elevating a minor aspect of the sun god, the Aten, the physical disk of the sun, to supreme deity, while suppressing the worship of other gods, particularly Amun. The Aten alone gives life, Akhenaten declares to his court. All other gods are false. Only through the Aten, and through me, its son, can truth be known. This wasn't just a theological shift, it was a direct attack on the powerful priesthood of Amun, who had grown so wealthy and influential that they threatened the king's authority. By closing their temples and redirecting their revenues to his new religion, Akhenaten was staging nothing less than a palace coup against the religious establishment. Within a few years, Akhenaten has moved his court to a new city called Akhetaten, horizon of the Aten, modern Tel El Amarna, built in a previously uninhabited stretch of desert about halfway between Thebes and Memphis. Let's visit this strange new capital as it's being constructed. Everywhere you look, workers are hauling stone, making mud bricks and raising buildings. The city is being built at an astonishing pace, with thousands of labourers working around the clock. The central area contains huge open-air temples to the Aten. Unlike traditional Egyptian temples, these have no roofs or inner sanctums, allowing the sun's rays to shine directly on the worship spaces. No dark chambers, no hidden mysteries, explains a royal architect. The Aten's light must reach everything. What's most striking about Akhetaten is how different it feels from traditional Egyptian cities. The art style has changed dramatically. Images of the king and his family show them with elongated heads, drooping features, and exaggerated physical characteristics. A complete departure from the idealized athletic depictions of previous pharaohs. The king says we must show things as they truly are, an artist explains as he carves a relief showing the royal family. No more perfect bodies, no more symbolic poses, truth alone matters now. Some scholars think these strange depictions might indicate Akhenaten suffered from a genetic disorder. Others believe it was purely a stylistic choice to break with artistic tradition. Whatever the reason, the Amarna style art is some of the most distinctive and strange from ancient Egypt. Most shocking of all are the intimate scenes of the royal family. Akhenaten is shown kissing his wife, bouncing his daughters on his knee, relaxing with his family under the rays of the Aten. Nothing like this exists in previous royal Egyptian art, where pharaohs were shown smiting enemies or standing stiffly before gods, not displaying affection to their families. The king says his love for his family mirrors the Aten's love for creation, explains a court official, though he looks uncomfortable with this radical new imagery. The queen at the centre of these family scenes is the famous Nefertiti, whose limestone bust in Berlin is one of the most recognised images from ancient Egypt. As Akhenaten's chief wife, she plays an unprecedented role in the new religion, almost as an equal partner to the king. The queen performs offerings alongside Pharaoh, a priest of the Aten tells you with pride. She is called the Beautiful One has come, and through her beauty the Aten's glory is revealed. But not everyone is happy with the religious revolution. In Thebes and other traditional religious centres, the closed temples of Amun sit empty, their priests dismissed, their revenues redirected to the Aten cult. The ordinary people whose families have worshipped the traditional gods for countless generations continue their practices in secret. "My grandfather was a priest of Ptah," whispers a craftsman as he checks no one is listening. "He taught me the old prayers. At night we still recite them with a statue hidden under the floor of our house." For all its radical theology, daily life in Akhetaten follows familiar Egyptian patterns. The king and his nobles live in luxurious palaces and villas, while ordinary workers inhabit simple mud brick homes. Markets still operate, craftsmen still practice their trades, and the bureaucracy still keeps meticulous records. Recent archaeological work at Amarna has uncovered the city's cemeteries, revealing a grim reality behind the beautiful art and high-minded theology. The skeletal remains show evidence of malnutrition, heavy physical labour, and numerous injuries. The city was built so quickly that the workers paid a high physical price. "My back is never without pain," confides a labourer as he hauls stone blocks. "We work from sunrise to sunset with few breaks. The king says we are blessed by the Aten, but my blessings feel like curses some days." Akhenaten's religious revolution lasted less than 2 decades. When he died around 1336 BCE, the experiment quickly unravelled. His immediate successor was Neferuaten, possibly Nefertiti ruling under a new name, followed by a shadowy figure named Smenkhkare. Then came Akhenaten's young son, originally named Tutankhaten, who would soon change his name to Tutankhamun and restore the traditional gods. Let's visit Thebes during this restoration period. The temples of Amun are reopening. Priests who had been forced into other occupations return to their duties. Statues of the traditional gods hidden away during Akhenaten's reign are being brought back to their shrines. "The divine order is restored," declares an elderly priest, tears in his eyes as he watches Amun's statue being carried back into Karnak Temple. The years of heresy are over. The boy king Tutankhamun, probably around 10 years old when he took the throne, is guided by powerful advisors, particularly an official named A and the general Horemheb. They orchestrate the return to orthodoxy, carefully dismantling Akhenaten's religious changes while maintaining royal authority. "The king has seen the truth and returned to the gods of his ancestors," I announces to the crowd at Karnak. Amun welcomes his son home. Tutankhamun's reign was brief. He died at about 19, possibly from complications after breaking his leg. His small tomb in the Valley of the Kings was largely overlooked by grave robbers, which is why his burial treasures survived intact until Howard Carter discovered them in 1922. The boy king, who was a minor figure in Egyptian history, became its most famous pharaoh through this archaeological accident. After Tutankhamun's death, his advisor A briefly took the throne, followed by the general Horemheb. Having no sons, Horemheb appointed his own vizier Paramessu as his successor. This man, who took the throne name Ramesses I, founded the 19th dynasty around 1292 BCE. His son Seti I and grandson Ramesses II would restore Egypt to glory after the disruptions of the Amarna period. Let's visit Egypt during the early reign of Ramesses II around 1279 BCE, who would become known to history as Ramesses the Great. The royal court has moved back to Pi-Ramesses in the Delta, a city rebuilt and expanded from the old Hyksos capital of Avaris. It's a vast, impressive city with multiple palace complexes, military barracks, and temples. Ramesses is particularly focused on military glory, eager to restore Egypt's empire after its neglect during the Amarna period. The king Between 1897 and 1899, roughly 100,000 people attempted the deadly journey to the Klondike goldfields, facing avalanches, starvation, freezing temperatures, and deadly rapids. The journey was brutal and merciless, with fewer than 30,000 even making it to Dawson City, and only about 200 actually striking it rich. Here's what life was really like for those who risked everything on the deadliest trail in America. If you fall asleep to these, hit subscribe. Also, comment where you're listening from. Got people from New York to Berlin last time. Kinda cool thinking we're all drifting off together. Alright, tonight it's the Klondike Gold Rush. But hold on, get yourself comfortable first. Like, actually cozy. Pillows good? Blanket situation handled? Perfect. Trust me on this one. The newspaper hits the floorboards with a slap that makes you jerk awake. Your landlord's voice booms through the thin door. Read rent's due tomorrow, don't make me come looking for you. You roll to your side on the lumpy mattress, springs digging into your ribs like accusing fingers. Seattle, 1897. Not exactly your golden era. The room smells like yesterday's fish and harbour fog, with a hint of desperation that seems to cling to everything these days. Your name is Thomas Reed, 32 years old, carpenter by trade, except there hasn't been much trade lately, not since the banks started collapsing in '93. 4 years of economic depression has a way of teaching you exactly how many meals you can skip before your hands shake too much to hold a saw. You drag yourself up and grab the newspaper, ready to scan the jobs section for the 5th time this week. But the headline stops you cold. Gold, ton of gold, arrives from Klondike. I mean, literally a ton. The steamship Portland just docked in Seattle yesterday with over a ton of gold. Today's equivalent of about $30 million, all from some creek nobody had ever heard of in Canada's Yukon Territory. You probably think I'm exaggerating. I'm not. This actually happened on July 15th, 1897. Real day, real gold, real ship. The article describes men stumbling down the gangplank, staggering under the weight of their fortunes. One guy had $5,000 in a coffee can, another carried $100,000 in a freaking sack. Several became millionaires literally overnight, from dust and nuggets they pulled out of a creek. Your fingers leave sweat marks on the newspaper as you read how it only took these guys a year in the Yukon to make more than you could earn in 10 lifetimes of carpentry. Sounds like horse shit to me, says Frank Porter, appearing at your doorway. He's a fellow tenant, burly iron worker who hasn't worked iron in months. It's real, you tell him, passing the paper. Look at the photographs. Frank whistles low. Jesus, that one fella's barely holding up his sack of gold. Says here they couldn't find enough men to carry it all off the ship. Makes you think, doesn't it? You say. Frank's eyes meet yours, and you both know what the other is thinking. In 1897, there's a popular song called Everybody's Working But Papa. That's America right now. Unemployment as high as 43% in some places. Men sleeping in alleys, bread lines stretching for blocks. And then suddenly, gold. Not like the California strike that was already played out. This was fresh, new, untapped. Frank hands the paper back. I heard they're calling it a stampede, thousands already booking passage north. The street outside is already different. You can feel it just looking out the window, men rushing past with a new energy, the scent of possibility cutting through Seattle's usual damp resignation. My cousin says tickets to Alaska are already selling out, Frank adds. Ships that haven't been in water for years suddenly getting patched up and pressed into service. You thinking about it, you ask. Frank snorts. With what money? Takes a small fortune just to get outfitted proper. He's right about that. The newspaper says the Canadian Mounties won't let anyone cross without a literal ton of supplies, a year's worth of food, proper gear for Arctic conditions, tools, the works. But here's the thing about desperation. It makes math very creative. 3 hours later, you're standing in your sister Margaret's kitchen explaining your brilliant plan while she looks at you like you've suggested swimming to China. "You want to go where?" she asks, pausing with a dish rag in her hand. "The Yukon," you repeat. "The Klondike, where they found the gold." Her husband, Robert, looks up from his coffee. "With what money, Thomas?" This is where it gets awkward. "Well, I was thinking perhaps you might—" "No," Margaret cuts you off. "Absolutely not. We have 3 children to feed. And I'll pay you back 10 times over," you insist. "Look at the paper. These men are coming back with fortunes." "These men," Robert says carefully, "are experienced miners and outdoorsmen. You're a carpenter who gets winded climbing the stairs." "Ouch, but not wrong. I'm strong enough," you insist, "and I can build anything. That's got to be useful up there." Margaret slams the dish down. "Do you have any idea what it's like up there? It's not just walking into the wilderness and picking up gold. People die, Thomas." "People are dying here too," you say quietly, slowly, of nothing. The kitchen falls silent except for the ticking clock. You've thought this through. You need about $600 for passage and supplies. Everything you own is worth maybe $40, but you're healthy, you're capable, and you're watching life slip away one missed meal at a time. "I read that it takes 2 weeks just to get there by boat," Margaret tries again. "And then what? Mountains? Ice? Wild animals?" "Better than tame creditors," you attempt to joke. Nobody laughs. "For 1 year, you say finally. Give me a loan for 1 year. If I haven't struck gold by then, I'll come back and work it off." Robert and Margaret exchange looks, that silent communication of married couples. "It's madness," Margaret whispers. "It's a chance," you counter. I'm skipping ahead a bit. Let me just tell you, they eventually gave in, not happily, but they did, and they weren't the only ones. All across America, families were having this exact same conversation. Brothers lending life savings to brothers, parents mortgaging farms, wives selling wedding silver. Gold fever isn't just a saying, it's a legitimate form of temporary insanity. The next week is a blur. Seattle has transformed into a gold rush supply depot overnight. The streets are jammed with men buying supplies, outfitters price gouging anything that might be needed in the north, and con men selling maps to secret gold spots. You're at Schwabacher's Hardware trying to decide between 2 different kinds of shovels when a grizzled man in a fur hat laughs at you. "Both those are worthless where you're going," he says. You look at him, and where exactly am I going? "Klondike, right? Written all over your face. First timer." You bristle slightly. "And you've been?" "3 times, he says, holding up fingers missing the top joints. "Frostbite, you realise with a chill. Lost these on my 2nd trip. Name's Harris." "Thomas Reed," you reply. "So which shovel would you recommend?" He snorts. "None of these. Look, kid, I'm 32. Like I said, kid, the ground up there is frozen solid, permafrost. You don't dig it like normal dirt. You thaw it inch by inch with fire. This is news to you. Fire? You build a fire on top of the ground, let it thaw down maybe a foot, dig that out, build another fire. It can take days to go down just a few yards." Your heart sinks a little. Nobody mentioned this part. "But that's only in winter, right?" you ask. Harris laughs again, a sound like boots on gravel. Winter is 9 months of the year up there, and the ground never really thaws deep. Listen, put back the fancy shovel and let me tell you what you actually need. For the next hour, Harris walks you through the store, pointing out what's essential and what's worthless. He's been to the Yukon 3 times, never struck it rich, but survived, which seems like an achievement in itself. Most important thing, he says, good boots, the best you can afford. Men lose toes up there like they're shedding skin. You swallow hard. And the gold? Is it really as plentiful as they say? Something flickers in Harris's eyes, something between hunger and warning. I've seen nuggets, the size of walnuts, just sitting in creek beds, he says quietly. But I've also seen men work for months and find nothing but mud and misery. The Yukon doesn't give up her gold easy. You keep running into Harris over the next few days as you gather supplies. There seems to be an invisible community forming, men preparing for the journey, sharing tips, warnings, rumours. Some have been mining for years, others, like you, couldn't tell gold from pyrite, but are willing to learn fast. You taking the White Pass Trail or Chilkoot? Harris asks over whiskey in a crowded saloon. You've been studying the maps. Everyone has to go to either Skagway or Dyer in Alaska by ship, then cross the coastal mountains to reach the headwaters of the Yukon River, which eventually leads to the gold fields. Chilkoot seems shorter, you reply. Harris nods. Steeper, though. Nearly straight up in places. But White Pass has turned into a mud pit with all the horses. They're calling it Dead Horse Trail now. Dead horse? Animals dying by the dozen, worked to death, breaking legs in the mud. The worst parts of the trail, you're literally walking on horse carcasses. You stare at your whiskey. Jesus. The Chilkoot's the smart choice for a man travelling light, Harris confirms. Just your own 2 feet to worry about. That night, back in your room, you spread out everything you've purchased on the floor. The Mounties won't let anyone cross the border without proof they're carrying a year's worth of supplies, no exceptions. Your pile includes 400 pounds of flour, 200 pounds of bacon, 100 pounds of beans, 25 pounds of dried vegetables, 25 pounds of coffee, 25 pounds of sugar, 25 pounds of dried fruit, a year's supply of matches, a gold pan, a shovel, an axe, a saw, a knife, cooking equipment, Arctic-rated clothing, boots, the best you could afford, tent, blankets, ropes. It all adds up to over 1,000 pounds of gear, and you'll be carrying every ounce of it yourself in multiple trips up a mountain trail that rises 3,500 feet in just 30 miles. You sit on your bed, suddenly overwhelmed. What the hell are you thinking? You've never even been camping before. There's a knock at the door. It's Frank. Got my ticket, he says, holding up a steamship passage to Alaska. Sold everything I own and borrowed the rest from my brother. You're going? You ask, surprised. We're going, he corrects you. SS Queen, leaving in 2 days. I got you a ticket too. Frank, I can't pay you back until we're rich, he finishes. I know, but 2 have better odds than 1, right? Besides, who else is going to make sure you don't fall off a mountain? 2 days. Just 2 days to say goodbyes, finish gathering supplies, and prepare for a journey that many won't survive. That night, you can't sleep. Your mind keeps circling through what lies ahead. The ship journey, the mountain pass, building a boat, riding rapids, finding a claim, mining in frozen ground, and somewhere at the end of it all, gold, freedom, a future, or death. Plenty of men will find only that. The night before departure, you have dinner at Margaret's house. The children are unusually quiet, watching you like you might disappear if they blink. I still think you're crazy, Margaret says, but she's made your favourite meal and packed extra socks in your gear. Probably am, you admit, but better a crazy chance than a certain slow decline. You write, she demands, every chance you get. I promise. Robert hands you a small leather pouch. It's a compass, belonged to our father. You swallow hard. I'll bring it back. Bring yourself back, Margaret says firmly. Morning comes too quickly. The docks are chaotic. Hundreds of gold seekers crowding gangplanks, mountains of supplies being loaded, families saying tearful goodbyes. The air smells of sea salt, coal smoke, and possibility. The SS Queen looks worryingly small for the journey ahead. A coastal steamer pressed into service for the Alaska route. Word is that any vessel that can float is now carrying stampeders north. They say we're packed in worse than cattle, Frank remarks as you jostle your way aboard with the bare essentials. Your main supplies are in the cargo hold. Cattle get slaughtered at the end of their journey, you reply. Let's hope the comparison ends there. The ship's whistle blows, deep and mournful. Final goodbyes are shouted across widening gaps of water. A man next to you is openly weeping as he waves to a woman on the dock. That your wife? You ask gently. Oh, my mother, he says, wiping his eyes. He can't be more than 20. She thinks I'm going to die up there. You don't know what to say to that. None of you know which ones will make it back. The Seattle shoreline slowly recedes, the familiar becoming distant. You're on your way to the Klondike, to the gold, to whatever fate awaits in the frozen north. Harris appears beside you at the railing. Last chance to turn back, he says with a crooked smile. Ship's already sailing, you point out. True enough. He spits into the water. Well, Reed, hope you're ready, because the real test isn't finding the gold. What is it then? His eyes meet yours, serious now. Surviving long enough to spend it. The ship turns northward, carrying its cargo of dreams and desperation toward the Alaskan coast. 2 weeks of open ocean before you reach Dyer. Then the real journey begins. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into, but there's no turning back now. The ship lurches violently, sending you crashing into the bulkhead. Your stomach heaves as the SS Queen rides another massive wave. 2 days at sea, and you've discovered something crucial about yourself. You were absolutely not meant to be a sailor. You look like death warmed over, Frank says, somehow still standing as the ship pitches again. You'd respond, but opening your mouth seems dangerous at the moment. The cramped cabin reeks of unwashed bodies, wet wool, and the unmistakable tang of vomit. There are 12 men sharing a space designed for 6, and at least half of you are seasick. I've got some advice, Frank continues, unhelpfully cheerful. My cousin was in the Navy, says you should eat something, keeps the stomach settled. You glare at him. If I eat something, it won't stay settled for long. The young kid who was crying for his mother when you departed is curled in a corner, moaning. He hasn't kept down food in 48 hours. You're worried about him, but also too miserable yourself to offer much help. Harris swings down from an upper berth, landing with the ease of someone who's done this journey before. Don't die on the boat, he says, nudging the kid with his boot. Pretty embarrassing way to go for a gold seeker. Is it always this rough? You manage to ask between waves of nausea. Harris shrugs. Sometimes worse. North Pacific ain't known for its hospitality. Outside your cabin, you can hear shouts as sailors rush to secure something that's broken loose on deck. The entire vessel groans and creaks with each swell, like it's contemplating whether to stay together or not. A man in the bunk above you leans down, face green. My brother did this last month. Said it took them 17 days to reach Dyer because of storms. 17 days? The thought makes your stomach turn again. If we sink, Frank jokes, at least we won't have to climb that mountain. Nobody laughs. Harris pulls out a flask and takes a swig. You know what's the real joke? This ain't even the hard part yet. 3 more days pass, each bringing new miseries. The storm finally breaks, but that just means you can now stagger around the deck instead of being confined below. The food is barely edible, salt pork and hardtack that seems designed to test the strength of your teeth. By the 6th day, a strange camaraderie has formed among the passengers. You learn names, share stories, swap tips gleaned from books and hearsay. Every man aboard has sold everything or borrowed heavily to make this journey. Every man believes he'll be the one to strike it rich. The kid, who couldn't stop vomiting, has recovered enough to introduce himself. William Daniels, 19 years old, former bank clerk from Portland. Everyone calls me Billy, he says, still pale but standing now. I've never even been camping before. You smile despite yourself. That makes 2 of us. 3, Frank admits, surprising you. Closest I got was sleeping in my uncle's barn after a wedding. Been too drunk to make it home. At night, huddled in your bunks, men talk about what they'll do with their gold. Buy a ranch in California, start a business, pay off debts, support aging parents. Your own dreams are more modest. A carpentry shop of your own, maybe a small house. Enough security that an economic downturn won't leave you starving. Harris rarely joins these conversations. When Billy asks him what he'll do with his next fortune, he just stares into his tin cup of coffee. First fortune got drunk away, he says finally. Second fortune went to doctors for my wife's consumption. She died anyway. Third one, he shrugs. Maybe I'll figure out something better to do with it this time. The ship grows quieter after that. On the 10th day, the captain announces we're approaching the Alaskan coast. Everyone rushes to the railing, straining for the first glimpse of land. What emerges from the morning fog steals the breath from your lungs. Mountains. Not like any mountains you've ever seen. These rise straight up from the sea, massive walls of rock and ice that pierce the clouds, snow-covered peaks that look like they're holding up the sky itself. Sweet Jesus, Frank whispers. That, Harris says, pointing at what seems like an impossibly narrow passage between towering cliffs, is where we're going. Billy's face has gone pale again. We have to climb those? Just the small ones, Harris replies with a grim smile. The Lynn Canal, they call it, a deep fjord cutting through the coastal mountains. The ship navigates carefully through waters crowded with chunks of ice that have carved off the glaciers. The closer you get to shore, the more intimidating the landscape becomes. And then rounding a bend, you see it. Dyer. That's it? Frank sounds disappointed. That is a muddy beach with a long pier stretching out into the water. Behind it, a scattered collection of tents and hastily constructed wooden buildings. And beyond that, the mountains, looming like judgmental gods. The real shock comes when the Queen anchors offshore, and you realise you're not pulling up to the pier at all. Shallow water, Harris explains. Big ships can't make it in. We get to ride the lighter boats. These lighter boats turn out to be flat-bottomed barges that look far from seaworthy. You and about 20 other men climb down into the first one, along with whatever personal items you could carry. What about our supplies? Billy asks, panicked. All my food and equipment. They'll unload the cargo after the passengers. The barge operator, a leathery man with a permanent squint, laughs. For a price, of course. Nothing's free in Dyer. He's not kidding. When you reach shore, the chaos is immediate. Hundreds of men are crowded on the beach, arguing with boat operators and local natives about transport prices. Mountains of supplies are piled haphazardly on the muddy ground. Dogs bark, men shout, and everything smells of salt water, mud, and unwashed humanity. "Welcome to Alaska," Harris says dryly. It takes 3 hours of arguing, negotiating, and finally paying exorbitant rates to get your supplies onto the beach. By then, the sun is setting, casting long shadows across the narrow valley that leads toward the infamous Chilkoot Pass. You stake out a small patch of relatively dry ground and set up the tent you'd purchased in Seattle, an activity that turns out to be far more complicated than the store clerk had suggested. "You've got it inside out," Frank points out after watching you struggle for 10 minutes. "I know that," you lie, flipping the canvas in frustration. Harris, who set up his own shelter with practiced efficiency, walks over with a steaming tin cup. "Coffee?" he offers. "Got a fire going." You accept gratefully. The evening air has a bite to it, colder than any Seattle night even though it's still summer. The coffee burns your tongue but sends warmth spreading through your chest. "What happens now?" you ask Harris. He gestures toward the valley. "Tomorrow we start hauling our gear toward the pass. First stop's a place called Finnegan's Point, about 6 miles in. Then it's Canyon City, then Sheep Camp. That's the last stop before the summit. And we carry everything ourselves." Billy has joined you by the fire, clutching his own cup of coffee like it might try to escape. Harris nods. "Unless you've got money for packers, natives will carry for about 20 cents a pound. Some white men doing it too now. You do the math quickly. 1,000 pounds of supplies at 20 cents a pound. That's $200, money you definitely don't have." "What's it like?" Frank asks. "The trail." Harris stares into the fire. "First part's not so bad. Gets worse as you go. The summit." He shakes his head. "The summit's something else. We've heard it's steep," you prompt. "Steep?" Harris laughs, but there's no humour in it. "It's damn near vertical in places. They've cut steps into the snow and ice. Imagine climbing a ladder made of ice, carrying 100 pounds on your back with a line of men behind you who'll trample you if you slip." Sleep comes fitfully that night. The ground is hard, the tent leaks slightly, and every few hours ships' whistles announce new arrivals. More men, more dreamers, more fools perhaps. Morning reveals a transformed Dyer. Overnight, at least 3 more ships have arrived, disgorging hundreds of stampeders and tons of supplies. The beach is now a maze of tents, crates, sacks, and men frantically organizing their outfits. "We should get moving," Harris advises over a breakfast of bacon and hardtack. "Trail gets more crowded every day." Getting moving turns out to be a relative term. First, you have to decide what to carry on your first trip. The strategy, Harris explains, is to move your supplies in stages. Carry what you can to the first camp, return for more, repeat until everything is at that camp, then start moving it all to the next one. Some men make 30 or 40 trips over the pass before they've moved their full outfit, he says. 40 trips over a mountain. The magnitude of the task ahead begins to sink in. You decide to carry about 80 pounds for your first load, mostly food staples secured in waterproof sacks. Frank manages to hoist about the same. Billy, smaller and less accustomed to physical labour, struggles with 60 pounds. "Don't overdo it," Harris warns as the young man staggers under his pack. "Better to make more trips than to injure yourself on the first day." The trail begins innocuously enough, a muddy path winding alongside the Taya River, which rushes with snowmelt from the mountains. The terrain is flat at first, the walking merely unpleasant rather than torturous. That changes rapidly. 2 miles in, the valley narrows. The trail climbs away from the river, ascending through dense forest. Roots and rocks make every step treacherous. The weight on your back seems to double with each hour. Your shoulders burn, your legs tremble. This is the easy part, Harris reminds you cheerfully when you stop to catch your breath. Men pass you going both directions, some heading toward the pass with heavy packs, others returning for their next load. Most nod in silent solidarity. A few offer encouragement. The really experienced ones don't waste breath on either. You encounter your first casualty about 4 miles in. A man sitting by the trail, boot off, foot swollen to twice its normal size. "Oh, stepped in a hole," he explains grimly. "Heard it snap." "Can you walk?" Frank asks. The man laughs bitterly. "Sure, all the way back to Seattle. There's nothing you can do for him. No doctors out here, no horses, no carts. If you can't walk, you can't continue." "Someone will help him back to Dyer," Harris says as you move on, but his tone suggests he's not entirely convinced. By late afternoon, your pack feels like it's filled with anvils instead of flour and beans. Your shoulders are raw. Each step requires conscious effort. Sweat soaks your clothes despite the cool air. There, Harris points ahead. Finnegan's Point. It's little more than a clearing where the valley widens slightly. Dozens of tents are already pitched. Men cook over small fires or sort through supplies. Others collapse in exhaustion. Some are already heading back down the trail for their next load. You drop your pack with a groan of relief. 6 miles. Just 6 miles. And you feel half dead. "How far to the pass from here?" you ask Harris. "About 24 more miles," he says. "Gets steeper with every one." Frank falls to the ground beside his pack. "And we have to do this, 30 more times?" "Give or take," Harris confirms. Billy arrives last, his face flushed, breathing hard. He drops his pack and immediately vomits into the bushes. "You'll get your trail legs soon enough," Harris tells him, not unkindly. Everyone does, or they go back. You set up your tent, force down some food, and try not to think about tomorrow's return trip to Dyer. Instead, you study the other stampeders. There's a strange efficiency developing among them. Men are forming informal partnerships, watching each other's supplies, sharing information about trail conditions. You see a group that's devised a clever pulley system to help get packs on their backs without assistance. "Smart," Harris observes, following your gaze. "Up here, you adapt or you fail." Despite your exhaustion, you struggle to sleep that night. Your body aches in places you didn't know could ache. The sounds of the camp, men snoring, coughing, occasionally crying out in their sleep, keep you drifting in and out of consciousness. Morning comes too soon. After a quick breakfast, you head back down the trail toward Dyer, your pack now empty. The return journey is faster but still taxing. Your muscles protest every step. In Dyer, the scene is even more chaotic than before. New ships have arrived. The beach is an obstacle course of supplies, animals, and men. You locate your cached supplies, select your next load, and prepare for the return trip to Finnegan's Point. As you're adjusting your pack, a commotion breaks out nearby. A team of horses has bolted while being unloaded from a barge. They charge through the crowded beach, dragging a half-secured cart behind them. Men dive out of the way. Supplies go flying. The horses, panicked, head straight toward a stack of crates, your crates. Frank shouts a warning, but it's too late. The horses plough into the pile, sending your carefully packed supplies tumbling. One crate splits open, spilling precious flour into the mud. "No," Billy rushes forward, trying to salvage what he can. The horse's owner, a red-faced man in a filthy coat, finally manages to get control of his team. He offers no apology, just a shrug before leading the animals away. "Son of a bitch," Frank seethes. "Welcome to the gold rush," Harris says, helping Billy scoop mud-soaked flour back into a sack. Rule 1, always secure your cash. You've lost maybe 20 pounds of flour. Not devastating, but every pound counts when you're required to have a year's supply. "We can replace it in sheep camp," Harris suggests. "Price is a highway robbery, but there are outfitters all along the trail now." You spend the rest of the day making the return trip to Finnegan's Point with your second load, then back to Dyer for a third. By the time you make camp that evening, every muscle in your body is screaming. Your boots have rubbed blisters on both heels. Your hands are raw from adjusting pack straps, and you've covered just 6 of the 30 miles to the pass. "It gets easier," Harris says, passing around a flask of whiskey as you all sit by the fire. "Body adjusts." "Does it?" Frank doesn't sound convinced. "No," Harris admits after a moment, "but you get better at ignoring the pain." Over the next week, you settle into a grueling routine. Up at dawn, load up, hike to the next cache point, return for more, repeat until collapse. Each day, you push a little further along the trail. From Finnegan's Point to Canyon City, another 6 miles of increasingly difficult terrain. The trail narrows, crosses the river on precarious log bridges, climbs steeply in places. Your outfit, the term everyone uses for their supplies, moves slowly up the trail in stages. Canyon City is little more than a collection of tents and a few hastily constructed buildings perched on a rocky shelf above the river, but it now has saloons, restaurants and outfitters charging 5 times Seattle prices for replacement supplies. Price of doing business? Harris shrugs when you express outrage at being asked $2 for a pound of coffee that costs 30 cents in Seattle. You notice changes in yourself as the days pass. Your hands, once smooth from carpentry work, are now calloused and cracked. Your shoulders no longer scream with each load. They merely grumble. You've lost weight, but your legs feel stronger. You're learning to pack efficiently, to balance loads, to pace yourself on the steeper sections. Frank has developed a hacking cough that worries you, though he insists it's nothing. Billy's transformation is the most dramatic. The bank clerk's soft hands are bleeding constantly, but he never complains. His face has thinned, making his eyes seem larger. He's quieter now, the initial panic replaced by grim determination. "How much further to the summit?" Billy asks as you all eat dinner outside your tents in Canyon City. "From here, it's about 5 miles to sheep camp," Harris answers. "That's the last stop before the scales." "The scales?" you ask. "The steepest part. They call it the scales because that's where they weigh your load before the final climb." Harris takes a bite of beans. "From sheep camp to the scales is about 4 miles. Then it's just under a mile to the summit. Steepest damn mile you'll ever walk." 10 more miles. It doesn't sound that far, but you've learned that distances mean something different here. The trail from Canyon City to Sheep Camp proves Harris right. It's by far the most difficult stretch yet, following the river through a narrow canyon where the path sometimes clings to sheer rock walls. In places, crude wooden walkways have been constructed over particularly treacherous sections. You see your first dead body on this stretch, a man lying face down beside the trail, pack still on his back. "Heart attack," someone says. No one has time to bury him. By unspoken agreement, you each remove your hats as you pass, but you keep moving, always moving. It takes 4 days to get all your supplies to Sheep Camp. The settlement is the largest you've seen since Dyer. Hundreds of tents spread across a widening of the valley, with actual wooden buildings housing businesses that seem more permanent. The reason becomes clear when Harris explains that many stampeders stage here for days or weeks, waiting for good weather before attempting the summit. "See that?" Harris points up the valley where the trees thin out and the bare rock and snow begin. At first, you're not sure what he's indicating. Then you see it. A thin black line zigzagging up an almost vertical slope, a line that's moving. "That's the trail?" Frank asks incredulously. "That's the trail," Harris confirms, "and each of those little moving dots is a man carrying a pack." You squint, trying to make sense of the scale. The dots look impossibly small against the vastness of the mountain. The trail itself seems to go straight up in places. "Good God," Billy whispers. "Many have called on him on that stretch," Harris says, not sure how often he answers. That night, in sheep camp, a storm rolls in. Rain hammers your tent. Wind threatens to tear the canvas from its stakes. The temperature drops sharply. By morning, the rain has turned to snow. "We wait," Harris declares, surveying the white-capped peaks above. "Only fools and the desperate try the summit in weather like this. You're not sure which category you fall into anymore. For 3 days, the storm rages. No one attempts the pass. Men crowd into the few saloons and restaurants, swapping stories, sharing concerns about supplies running low. Rumours spread. The pass is closed for the season. The Canadian Mounties are turning people back. Someone died in an avalanche yesterday." Harris dismisses most of these. "Trail gossip," he says, "but the avalanche risk is real enough when it snows like this." On the 4th morning, you wake to silence. The wind has stopped. Poking your head outside the tent, you see stars fading in a pre-dawn sky of perfect clarity. "Today," Harris announces, already packing his summit gear. "We go today." You gather only what you can carry in one trip, about 80 pounds of your most essential supplies. The plan is for each of you to make multiple trips over the summit, just as you've done on earlier sections. "Leave your tent," Harris advises. "We'll come back for the rest once we've established a cache on the other side." By the time you're ready, a steady stream of men is already moving up the trail toward the scales. Everyone recognizes the opportunity of clear weather. Everyone knows it might not last. The trail out of sheep camp starts gradually enough, winding through the last stunted trees before the timberline. But soon the vegetation disappears entirely, replaced by snow, ice, and rock. The path steepens dramatically. Your breath comes in painful gasps. The air seems thinner, though Harris says it's just the exertion. Sweat freezes on your face. Your pack feels like it's filled with lead, and you haven't even reached the real challenge yet. 3 hours of brutal climbing brings you to what must be the scales. Relatively flat area where the trail seems to pause before the final ascent. Men with makeshift scales are indeed weighing packs, though it's not clear who authorized them to do so. "Too heavy," one declares, examining Billy's load. "You'll never make it up with that." "I have to," Billy insists. The man shrugs. "Your funeral." You look up at what awaits. The infamous Chilkoot Pass. From here, it's clear why Harris called it damn near vertical. The trail is literally a staircase chopped into the snow and ice, rising at an angle that seems impossible for a laden man to climb. It stretches up and up, disappearing into a notch between peaks that marks the summit and the Canadian border, and the stairs are packed with men moving slowly upward in a continuous line like ants climbing a wall. "They call it the Golden Stairs," Harris says beside you, though there's nothing golden about them. You watch as a man near the top stumbles, loses his balance, and falls. His pack comes loose, tumbling down the slope, narrowly missing several climbers before smashing onto the rocks below. Somehow, the man himself manages to catch himself, clinging to the steps as those behind him carefully maneuver around. "That's about a year's wages he just lost," Harris remarks. "And almost his life," you add. Harris just nods. "Ready?" "No, you're not ready. Looking at that final climb, you're not sure you'll ever be ready, but Frank is already adjusting his pack. Billy, pale but determined, is doing the same. So you hoist your load, tighten the straps until they bite into your shoulders, and take your place in the line of men preparing to ascend the golden stairs. The final test is about to begin. The first step onto the golden stairs nearly breaks you. Your boot slips on ice polished smooth by thousands of feet before yours. For one heart-stopping moment, you're certain you're going down, taking a dozen men with you. Somehow your hand finds a grip on the crude rope strung alongside the steps. You steady yourself, breathing hard. One step, Harris grunts from behind. Then another. Don't think about the top. One step, then another. Your world narrows to the ice beneath your feet and the back of the man in front of you. The pack tries to pull you backward with each movement. 80 pounds doesn't sound like much until it's actively trying to kill you. The line moves with excruciating slowness. No one can pass, no one can rest. To step out of line means to yield your spot, which might mean hours more waiting, so you keep climbing, though your legs burn and your lungs feel like they're filling with broken glass. 20 minutes in, the man ahead of you stops suddenly. The whole line grinds to a halt. "What's happening?" you call forward. The word comes back down the line. "Fallen pack, blocked trail." You take the moment to catch your breath. Sweat pours down your back despite the freezing temperature. You don't dare look down, or up for that matter. Better not to know how far you've come or how far you have to go. "Doing all right, Reed?" Harris asks. You manage a grunt that might pass for yes. The line starts moving again. Step, breath. Step, breath. Men curse, men pray, men count steps aloud like it's the only thing keeping them sane. Maybe it is. An hour into the climb, your body is screaming for rest. Your shoulders are on fire where the pack straps dig in. Your thighs quiver with each step, yet all around you, men keep climbing. So you climb too. Billy is somewhere ahead, Frank somewhere behind. You've lost sight of both in the single-file trudge upward. It's just you, the mountain, and hundreds of strangers all fighting the same battle. The wind picks up, sending needles of ice against your exposed face. Your beard, which you haven't bothered to shave since Seattle, is crusted with frozen breath. The fingers gripping the guide rope have lost all feeling. Almost halfway, someone shouts encouragingly. You could kill that man with your bare hands if you had the energy to reach him. 2 hours in, a commotion erupts further up the stairs. Shouts, a scream. The line stops again. "Man down," comes the call. Heart gave out. They're passing him down the line, hand to hand, a limp form being carefully manoeuvred past the ascending climbers. When the body reaches you, you see his face, blue-tinged, eyes staring at nothing. He looks about 60, though it's hard to tell beneath the frost-crusted beard. "One less man at the diggings," someone mutters as the body continues its journey down. You want to be horrified at the callousness, but a small, terrible part of you understands. Up here, death is just another obstacle to navigate around. 3 hours. Your world has become pain. Your legs move mechanically, without conscious input from your brain. The only thought you can hold on to is Harris's advice. One step, then another. "Look up, Reed," Harris wheezes behind you. "Take a gander." Against your better judgment, you raise your eyes from the endless stairs. And there it is, the summit. Much closer now, a notch between peaks where men are silhouetted against the sky, moving over the top and disappearing from view. The sight gives you a surge of energy. "We're going to make it," you say, half to yourself. "Course we are," Harris replies. "Told you the stairs was the hard part. After this, easy street." You don't believe him for a second. 4 hours after beginning the ascent, your hand reaches up and finds nothing. No more stairs. You've reached the top of the Chilkoot Pass. With a final tremendous effort, you haul yourself and your pack over the edge. The summit is flatter than you expected, a small plateau between peaks. Men collapse here, gasping for breath before gathering themselves for the journey onward. You join them, falling to your knees, then rolling onto your back. The sky above is a perfect blue. You've never seen anything so beautiful. Made it, Frank wheezes, appearing beside you and dropping his pack. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Where's Billy? You ask, suddenly concerned. Frank points back toward the stairs. Coming, slower, going for him. 10 minutes later, Billy crests the summit. His face is grey with exhaustion, but his eyes are bright with triumph. He staggers a few steps, then collapses next to you. I thought, he gasps, I thought I was going to die on those stairs. Day's still young, Harris says cheerfully, appearing behind him. Plenty of time for dying yet. You laugh, the sound strange in your own ears. You've made it over the Chilkoot Pass. The worst is behind you. Or so you think, until Harris points to a line of men at the far edge of the summit plateau. Canadian customs, he explains. Mounties checking everyone's outfit. They're doing that up here? Frank asks incredulously. Harris nods. Summit's the border. They want to make sure nobody gets through without their year's supplies, like I told you in Seattle. They're serious about it. The red-coated Mounties have set up a checkpoint where the trail continues down the Canadian side. Each stampeder must present his outfit for inspection. Those who don't have the required supplies are turned back, forced to return down those golden stairs to gather more. But we're only carrying part of our outfits, you protest. The rest is still at sheep camp. They know that, Harris reassures you. Just tell them you've got multiple loads coming. They'll issue you a numbered tag. You show that each time you cross with more supplies. The four of you join the inspection line. After half an hour of waiting, you reach a stern-faced Mountie with a clipboard. He looks you over with practiced efficiency. Name? He asks. Thomas Reed. How many in your party? 4. Total weight of your outfit? About 1,000 pounds each, sir. How many trips do you anticipate making over the pass? You look at Harris, who holds up his fingers. Probably a dozen or so, you answer. The Mountie nods and hands each of you a small metal tag with a number stamped into it. Present this each time you cross. Once your complete outfit has been verified, you'll receive a certificate allowing you to proceed to the Yukon Territory. Yes, sir, you reply, surprised by the bureaucratic efficiency in such a remote location. Welcome to Canada, the Mountie adds, almost as an afterthought. And good luck. Beyond the checkpoint, the trail descends sharply again, though nothing like the brutal stairs on the American side. The path winds down through snowfields toward a tree line in the distance. Crater Lake is about 3 miles down, Harris informs you. That's our next staging area. After that, it's on to Lake Lindeman, then Lake Bennett. How far to Bennett? Billy asks. From here, about 30 miles. 30 more miles of hauling supplies. The thought is almost enough to make you turn around. Don't look so glum, Harris says, noticing your expression. The worst is behind us now, and Bennett's where we build the boats. Boats? This is news to you. Harris nods. Only way to get to Dawson once you've got all your gear over the pass. Build a boat at Bennett, then float down the Yukon River, about 500 miles. 500 miles by boat, through unknown waters, in a vessel you have to build yourself. The magnitude of this journey keeps expanding before you. One step at a time, Frank reminds you, seeing your face. Let's just get to Crater Lake first. The descent is easier than the climb, but still treacherous with heavy packs. The snow gives way to rocky terrain, then sparse trees as you lose elevation. By late afternoon, you reach Crater Lake, a small, ice-rimmed body of water surrounded by a growing tent city. Like every stop before, you establish a cache for your supplies, set up a temporary camp, then prepare for return trips to bring the rest of your outfit over the pass. Harris suggests resting for the remainder of the day before heading back to sheep camp tomorrow. You don't argue. Every muscle in your body feels wrung out. You manage to help set up the tent and heat some beans before collapsing into an exhausted sleep. Morning brings fresh pain as your abused body protests even the simplest movements, but there's no choice but to continue. You leave most of your gear at Crater Lake and begin the trek back to sheep camp for your next load. Heading down the golden stairs proves almost as challenging as going up, just in different ways. The strain shifts from thighs to knees. The constant braking motion sends shooting pains through your shins. Men pass you going both ways, up with fresh loads, down for more. It takes 3 days to get back to sheep camp, gather your next loads, and return to the summit. The Mountie checks your tag, nods, and waves you through once more. You make the descent to Crater Lake for the second time, add the new supplies to your cache, then turn around again. This becomes your life. Up and down. Up and down. Load after load. The days blur together in a haze of exhaustion and pain. Your world narrows to the trail, the weight on your back, and the next step forward. On your 6th crossing of the summit, you hear rumours of disaster. An avalanche has struck the trail just below sheep camp, burying dozens of stampeders. Was anyone we know there? You ask Harris anxiously when you meet him at Crater Lake. He shakes his head. Don't think so, but they're saying 60, maybe 70 men died. The news is sobering. Nature, it seems, is an even more formidable gatekeeper than the Mounties, yet the line of men crossing the pass never diminishes. If anything, it grows longer as more ships arrive in Daya and Skagway. By your 9th crossing, you're moving the last of your supplies over the summit. The Mountie with the clipboard checks your tag one final time, then hands you each a certificate. You're cleared for the Yukon Territory, he announces. Good luck at the diggings. From Crater Lake, you begin moving your complete outfit toward Lake Bennett, where you'll build your boats. The terrain is less steep now, but still challenging. A series of smaller lakes connected by portages. Lake Lindeman comes first, a long, narrow body of water nestled between mountains. Some stampeders are already building boats here, unwilling to make the final portage to Bennett, but Harris advises against it. Lindeman empties into Bennett through rapids that'll tear a poor boat to pieces, he explains. Better to make the final haul and build at Bennett itself. So you continue, moving your supplies in multiple trips along the shores of Lindeman, then over a rocky ridge to the final destination, Lake Bennett. The journey from summit to Bennett takes another 2 weeks of relentless labour. Bennett is like nothing you've seen before. The narrow end of a long lake stretching northward, its shores have been transformed into a vast construction yard. Thousands of men are busy felling trees, sawing planks, and building boats of every conceivable design. The air rings with hammers, saws, and occasional curses. My God, Billy breathes when you crest the final rise and see the lake spread before you. It's like a city of boats, Frank agrees. Harris surveys the scene with a practiced eye. We need to find a spot with good timber nearby, and we'll need to build a saw pit. A what, you ask? Saw pit. One man stands below, one above. You work a long saw between you to cut planks from logs, unless you've got money for the sawmill. You follow his gaze to where a steam-powered sawmill has been set up near the water's edge. A long line of men wait with logs, ready to pay exorbitant prices to have them cut into usable lumber. We'll do it ourselves, you decide. Money is running too short for luxuries. You find a spot about 100 yards from the shore, close to a stand of spruce trees suitable for boat building. By nightfall, you've established your final camp and secured your supplies. That evening, sitting by the fire, you try to process how far you've come. From Seattle to Dyer, up the Chilkoot Pass, across the lakes to Bennett, and all while carrying 1,000 pounds of supplies on your back, piece by piece. So we build boats next, you say to Harris. How long will that take? He considers. Depends how good we are. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Need to fell trees, cut planks, shape them, seal everything tight. It's not simple work. I'm a carpenter, you remind him. I know wood. Buildings don't float, he replies, but there's respect in his tone. Still, that'll help. And after the boats? Billy asks. After we build 'em, we ride 'em. Harris gestures northward, down the length of Lake Bennett. Lake leads to the Yukon River system. About 500 miles of water between here and Dawson City. Any more mountains to climb? Frank asks, rubbing his still aching shoulders. Nope, but there's the White Horse Rapids to get through. They've claimed plenty of boats and men. Of course there are rapids, you sigh. The next morning, boat building begins in earnest. First task, creating a saw pit. You and Frank dig a trench about 6 feet deep and 8 feet long, reinforcing the sides with logs to prevent collapse. This will allow one man to stand below while another stands above, working together to saw logs into planks. Next, you select suitable trees and begin the laborious process of felling them with axes and saws. Each tree must be limbed, cut to length, then lowered into the saw pit for processing into planks. It's exhausting work, but your carpentry skills prove valuable. Harris, who's built boats before, takes charge of the design. Nothing fancy, he explains. Flat-bottomed scow with a pointed bow. About 20 feet long, 5 feet wide, big enough for our outfits, but not too unwieldy for the rapids. Days pass in a blur of sawdust and sweat. Your hands blister, then callus over, then blister again. But the boat gradually takes shape. Frank proves surprisingly skilled with an axe, while Billy, though less physically strong, has a meticulous attention to detail that helps ensure the fit of each plank. All around you, similar scenes play out as hundreds of men race to build their vessels before the short northern summer ends. Not everyone knows what they're doing. You see boats taking shape that look unlikely to float even in calm water, let alone survive rapids. That one will sink within an hour, Harris predicts, nodding toward a particularly unfortunate construction nearby. Its builder, a former banker from Chicago, has used green wood that's already warping badly. Bennett develops its own economy and social life. Men with specialised skills offer their services for a fee. Temporary saloons serve overpriced whiskey. Gambling tents operate day and night. A few enterprising women have made the trek over the pass and now run restaurants or laundry services, charging astronomical rates that men gladly pay for a hot meal or clean clothes. News travels up and down the trail. More avalanches, more death